Hello! Let's rank my Book of the Month picks for 2021. If you're new to my channel, I am Colleen. I am not sponsored by Book of the Month. This is not a sponsored video. I'm just a regular old-fashioned member and thought it might be fun to go over my purchases from 2021 and let you know what I thought of them. This video is going to have some spoilers in it. Not like horrible spoilers. I'm not going to tell you the entire plot of books, but because I'm giving pretty thorough reviews on this, I am going to have some spoilery plot points included in my reviews. So my stats for the year, I joined Book of the Month in July. I purchased a total of 9 books this year from them. I got 8 books that came out in 2021 and 1 book that was a backlist that came out in a previous year. My genre breakdown was really varied, which was nice because that was the main reason I joined Book of the Month, to read some of the genres that I hadn't been reading as much lately. I had 1 magical realism, 1 historical fiction, 2 romances, 1 memoir, 1 contemporary fiction, 2 fantasy, and 1 mystery. In terms of breaking down what I thought of them, I have 2 books I didn't like, 2 books I thought were good, 2 books I thought were very good, and 3 books I thought were great, which is a pretty good breakdown. I just want to quickly apologize. Obviously, it's winter break. All my kids are home, and I'm trying to film while they're downstairs being very loud, so I'm sorry if you can hear them. Hopefully, you cannot. On to the books. The first book I'm going to rank is the book I got off Backlist that did not come out in 2021. I didn't think it was fair to put it in the rankings because it was so good. It's immediately in my top 5 books of all time, and that's Circe by Madeline Miller. I have just been wanting to read this for years and finally got around to it when I saw that Book of the Month had it in hardcover for like a great price as an add-on, so I bought it, and it's phenomenal. As I said, it's an immediate top 5 books of all time. I will definitely reread this book over and over again. If you aren't familiar with it, which I'm sure you are since this book has been popular for a long time, it is a retelling of the story of Circe, who we know from the Odyssey. She is kind of a minor god, and we follow her life over the span of thousands of years. I've said before, I like books that take place over long periods of time, and what's better than thousands of years? This book is fantastic. I'm definitely going to read The Song of Achilles in 2022, and I saw that she just announced her next book is going to be a Persephone retelling, which I can't wait for because I do think with Madeline Miller's background in classics, we will get a very interesting retelling of Persephone that is not going to be just a, what if Hades and Persephone were actually in love? And if you are a Greek mythology person like I am, sometimes it's hard to get into the Hades-Persephone romance that's been going around lately because if you are very familiar with the myth, that's not what happened. So obviously Circe, Madeline Miller, amazing, all the stars in the sky. Okay, from here on out, we're gonna go bottom to top. So Circe was top cream of the crop. These are going to be the books I didn't like are next. And the first book I read from Book of the Month that I didn't like is Half Sick of Shadows by Sebastian. This book I was very disappointed in because I thought it was going to be one of my new favorite books, kind of like Circe. It is an Arthurian legend retelling. My favorite book of all time is The Mists of Avalon by Marion Zimmer Bradley, which is an Arthurian legend retelling. So I was really, really excited for it. To me, this book fell really flat because it didn't have sort of the charm of Arthurian legend. There was very little in this book besides the character names even that felt at all connected to the original myths. We have Guinevere as a like shape-shifting warrior. You have Mordred is Arthur's brother. There's just a lot of inconsistencies between the original Arthurian legend and Half Sick of Shadows. I also didn't think that it was reinvented very well. This book also felt very YA to me, and I don't really read YA, and I think it should have been marketed as YA because there was nothing in this book to keep it from being a YA fantasy versus an adult fantasy. So I think I gave this book 2.75 stars. I understand why it was published. I don't understand a lot of the anachronisms that are in here that editors should have caught. I don't like the fact that there's this whole alternate history that happens in this book where there has been a war between the Fae. I don't mind the Fae being involved in Arthurian legend because when you read the original tales like Le Morte d'Arthur, you know, there are interactions with non-human characters, but I did not like the way it was set up in this book. So, and oddly, this is the book that got me to sign up for Book of the Month. I really wanted to read it, and I saw that they had it. I'd been hemming and hawing about whether or not to sign up for Book of the Month. So it was the first book I bought. So kind of a letdown that I didn't like it, but so many other books were great. The next book that I got that is still in my didn't like tier, I got as an add-on. So it wasn't one of their, 5 picks of the month, but I had heard so much about this author that I felt like I had to give her a try. And sadly, whereas I thought I might be finding a new author I love, I did not, and I don't think I will ever read another book by her, and that was It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover. I understand she has a huge following. She has like almost a Sarah J. Maas following on social media. This book's just not for me. I would say that I might have liked this book if I read it when I was like 19, but I'm not 19. So it really just felt really sort of like a Lifetime movie in a bad way to me. Also, this was marketed as a romance, and this book is not a romance. It's not. Like, when you have a genre, romance is supposed to be a book about a central romantic relationship that ends in a happily ever after. And this book is really neither of those things. We follow our main character, Lily, in her early 20s. I think she's like 23, 24. And then we have some flashbacks to her teenage years. And it's about the relationship she's in her 20s and the relationship she's in her teenage years, which are with 2 different people. I would classify this book as a women's fiction or even as like a new adult fiction, because Lily felt extremely immature. And I know she's supposed to be 23, 24, and you are more mature when you're that age. But she's in a relationship with a 29, 30-year-old, which felt weird. And then her teenage relationship, she's 15, so, like just turned 16, in a relationship with an 18-year-old, which also felt weird. I know that this book was heavily influenced by Colleen Hoover's actual experience being a witness to a physically and emotionally abusive relationship. So I understand, coming from that, wanting to write a book like that. The book just felt very like cheesy to me. Like when I was reading this book, I kept saying to my husband, like, oh my God, when certain stuff would happen, because it just felt like not organic. This is a very fast read because I wasn't enjoying it, and I think I was on page like 80 or maybe 100 and wasn't liking it, but I wanted to finish it because I wanted to finish all the books I got from Book of the Month before the new year. So I literally just like read the last like 200 straight pages in like probably 90 minutes. The font is very big and there's really not that many words on a page. So it is a quick read. It just really wasn't for me. I will say I think the cover art is beautiful. I think that this was really misrepresented though, because I wouldn't have bought a women's fiction or a new adult fiction because I don't like to read either of those categories. So when it said, romance, I thought I was going to get like a really angsty contemporary romance. And I knew that there was emotional abuse and physical abuse in it. So I thought this was going to be a story where at the beginning of the book, our main character, or maybe even reflecting upon her teenage years, had been in an abusive relationship, and her finding someone to sort of like heal her wounds and then heal her own wounds and then be able to move on and be in a healthy relationship, which is not what this book is about at all. So It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover. I think I also gave this 2.75 stars. And I understand why people like it. I definitely think this should be billed as new adult contemporary fiction, or at the very least women's fiction. Not a romance, not really adult. Moving on to books I thought were good. So these are books that I rated between 3 and 4 stars. They didn't hit like the really good or the great for me, but I don't want the time back that I spent reading them. I enjoyed them. I thought that they were well written and had, positive points. And the first one is Beautiful Country by Qian Wang. This is a memoir about pretty much a girl. We start when she's very young, who is taken to the United States from China by her parents and living as an illegal immigrant in New York City in the 90s. Parts of this book I really liked. I just thought it was a little slow-paced for me. I did really like her story. I would still really recommend this book to anyone looking for like a book club type book and wanted to read nonfiction, because I do think this book lends itself really well to discussing it with other people. It is more of like a slow to medium paced story, and I think part of the reason I didn't have this higher up in my rankings was that I read this when I was sort of coming off another slow medium pace book, and it wasn't really like the right type of book for me to read at that point. I do think this was a very important story to read, and it was really interesting for me to read because the author and I are very close in age. So stuff she talked about in terms of like just like pop culture and like what was going on in the world at the time really made a lot of sense to me, as I was also her same age during all of these things happening. A lot of the book is about her parents' relationship and her relationship with her parents, which I liked a lot. I mean, you'll really feel for the whole family the entire time. I do think this type of story should be told more often, because I do think in our country we have a problem with sympathy in terms of people in situations that are different than ours. That's a whole different topic I really shouldn't go on a huge rant on while talking about this book. But again, I liked this book. I think I gave it like 3.5 stars, maybe 3.75 stars, definitely above average. And if you are a person who really likes reading memoirs, I would recommend it as a good memoir read. The next book I thought was good was The Ex-Hex by Erin Sterling. This was my October pick, and it is a fantasy paranormal romance about a witch and a warlock in a town in Georgia. It's very like purposely like fall vibes, fall fests, magic, stuff like that. I did really like the fantasy plot line of this, where we have Vivi, our heroine, and Reese, our hero, who are trying to sort of fix magic in their town. And I found that plotline very interesting. I wasn't as into the romance. It felt a little flat for me. It felt a little like YA romance to me. I said this in my review in October, my October Reads wrap up, but this book was like getting all these reviews that it was like so hot and so steamy. And I think it was getting those reviews from people who don't usually read romance, because while this was an open door romance, it felt like sort of like an open door romance, but like really pulled back. So if you're looking for like a super hot witchy romance, I wouldn't recommend this one. But if you are someone who maybe doesn't read romance that often and wants to like dip their toe in from fantasy, I think The Ex-Hex is a good book to do that with. I think I rated this like 3.75 or maybe 4 stars. I definitely think the fantasy portion would get like a higher star rating and the romance portion a lower star rating. Now we're moving on to books I thought were very good. So this is like the 4-star up rating. The first is The Family by Naomi Krupitsky. I really liked this book. It is the only historical fiction book I got from Book of the Month this year. We follow 2 women from girlhood through mid-20s, I believe they are, and from the years 1926 to 1946, I believe. Let's check. 1928 to 1948, and they are neighbors, best friends, and connected because both of their fathers are part of the family, which is basically the Italian mafia in the United States, in Brooklyn specifically. We follow Antonia and Sophia. They have very different views on life. Very early in the book, Antonia's father disappears, and it's very sad, but it also frames their lives quite differently in how they look at the family from then on. This book is very beautifully written. If you like a book with prose that's just going to sweep you off your feet, I would definitely get this book. There are so many lines in it that just I read multiple times. It's a slow read because of that, because this is definitely not a book you can skim. You really want to take the time to read every single word because it's so beautifully written. But this is I would say it's like a medium-paced read. This is another one of those books that takes place over a long period of time, so you feel like you really get to know the characters. I mean, you meet Sophia and Antonia when they're like 6 years old, and then they're mothers by the end, and married and dealing with their own families and how the family is affecting their lives. Definitely a great read if you're looking for historical fiction. Cool to read the mafia story from the point of view of the women, and kind of like a quieter mafia story, not like all these like warfare type shootouts or whatever, just like sort of more like what it felt like to be a woman in these lives in that time period. I think I gave this book 4.5 stars if I remember correctly. Next up is Arsenic and Adobo by Mia Manansala, and I loved this cozy mystery. I gave it 4.5 stars, and it was really fun. So we have Leela, who has recently returned to the small town she grew up in to help her aunt run her restaurant. The cool thing about this town, which is a small town in the Midwest, which I live in a small town in the Midwest, is it's got like the best restaurant scene. My small town in the Midwest does not have that. I'd appreciate it, but we don't have that. So Leela moves home and she is working in her family's restaurant. She has an ex-boyfriend who is running a food blog because obviously the small town could support a food blogger because they've got so many good restaurants. And he writes really negative things about her family's restaurant and a lot of the other restaurants in town. She and he have a very prickly relationship. And one day he comes in and she's kind of like giving him sass. And he's eating at the restaurant and he just drops dead. So she quickly becomes the main suspect because he's been writing bad things about their relationship or about their restaurant, and they have a prior relationship. So she has to figure out who actually killed him. It's really fun. It's super cozy mystery. It really reminds me of the Hallmark series, and it's based on a book series, Murder, She Baked. And I would love it if Hallmark would turn this into a series because I think it would be really fun and you'd get to have all this cool food in the background. Hallmark, you should do it. Or anyone, Netflix, do it. I'd watch it. Come on, do it. Super fun book. There's going to be a series. I will definitely get the next one. And we'll see if Book of the Month has the next one in their lineup. All right, moving into the books that I thought were great. So these are my 5-star reads. Obviously, I already talked about Circe, which was a 5-star read. But my other 2 5-star reads were A History of Wild Places by Shea Earnshaw, which was my December pick. And I'm really happy I picked this book because I was definitely hemming and hawing about whether or not I wanted to pick it, but the magical realism sold it. This book is hard to describe without completely spoiling it, so I am going to just give you little tidbits about what the plot's about. So we open with a young man named Travis, and he is sort of like a psychic. He can find lost people, and he's been hired by a family to find their daughter who's been missing for, I believe, 5 years. She was a children's book author, and her books were kind of dark, and kids were following what characters in her book did and getting lost in the woods, and then a child died, and she sort of disappeared after that. It's an interesting beginning because right off the bat, her dad really wants to find her, where her mom is like, I think she doesn't want to be found, which, I liked that a lot because I was like, okay, so obviously there's something going on. Maybe the mom knows about, they don't know. And Travis asked the mom right away, do you know where she is? Just tell me, don't make me want a wild goose chase if you know where she is. And she says she doesn't. So we follow Travis, and it's winter and super creepy. And we're in the Pacific Northwest, which I think is such a good setting for a wintry, creepy story. And he is following this trail he has psychically found of her into the woods. Then we jump. You can't tell where you jump. If you jump past or forward or what at first. So we have 3 new narrators. Their names are Theo, Calla, and B. And Calla and B are sisters. They've all lived in this community for years. You definitely get weird vibes from this community because when you're reading it, you're like, is it the 70s? Is it present day? When are we? And you don't know. This has a twist that I read some reviews and people were like, I saw the twist coming. I didn't see the twist coming. What the heck are you talking about? I definitely thought the twist was going to be a different twist, which I thought was more realistic, but maybe I just missed clues. I don't know. But there's definitely weird stuff going on. It's got really creepy vibes without being scary. As you know, I don't really like to read scary books, but this is creepy without being scary. I also really appreciate the author has clips from the missing children books author's books. So there's these little vignettes throughout it that kind of frame the story that I really liked. This is another book that's really well written. The prose is beautiful. You definitely feel creeped out in a beautiful way. It's this place is beautifully creepy, and so is this book. Definitely has some magical realism elements that you have to sort of suspend reality at different points to make you believe the story, but I love stories like that, but not enough that it feels like fantasy. It does feel like it's rooted in our world. So that is A History of Wild Places by Shea Earnshaw, definitely a 5-star read. And my last book, my favorite book I got from Book of the Month all year, and definitely a contender for the best release of 2021 that I read, is Once There Were Wolves by Charlotte McConaghy. This book was interesting because I read it in one day, and when I finished, I think I gave it like 4.5 stars. But I literally haven't stopped thinking about this book since I read it. I think I got it in my August book box, and I almost didn't get it. There were a bunch of books in the August book box that I was interested in. So I was kind of like deciding whether or not I wanted to get it. I'm really happy I did. It's a contemporary fiction, which I've recently gotten back into reading contemporary fiction. We follow Inti, and there's a lot of this isn't a mystery, but there's a lot of, secrets of the past that get revealed throughout the book. And she is I want to say a wildlife biologist is probably her title, but her job is to reintroduce wolves into the Scottish Highlands. She is meeting a community that really doesn't want this to happen and is worried about their livestock. She has brought her twin sister, and they're identical twins, Aggie, to live with her, and something horrible had happened to them when they were living in Alaska, which was the last place they lived together. And you jump between the present, when they're in Scotland, and them living in Alaska, and their childhood, which they split between their parents. Their father, who had them living in basically full wilderness, which I believe they were in British Columbia. I don't think they were actually in Alaska. For some reason, I was thinking they're in Canada. And their mother, who was a police officer living in Australia. And sort of the strange juxtaposition of their lives, living in a world where their mother saw the worst of humanity and living in a world with their father where they saw no humanity and only saw the natural world. This book has a lot of trigger warnings. There is description of sexual assault, physical assault, animal abuse. It's, not an easy read, but it is a really fast read because it's once you get to page 100, you really can't put it down. It's also not very long of a book. I think it's in the high 200s. Yeah, it's only 256 pages, so it's a pretty short read, but I just can't say enough good things about this book. Obviously, if those trigger warnings are difficult for you, proceed with caution. I didn't thoroughly read the trigger warnings, and honestly, I don't know if I would have picked it up if I read them, and I still loved this book, so I'm really glad I did. One more trigger warning, this book has a really, really brutal birth scene in it, and if you are someone who is perhaps getting ready to give birth for the first time, I wouldn't necessarily recommend reading it. If you are someone who likes contemporary fiction or likes books that are a little bit darker with rougher topics, I would really recommend reading Once There Were Wolves. And if you belong to Book of the Month, grab it in hardcover because it's really, really great book. So those are my rankings of my books. There is a book I wish I had gotten and didn't get, and I kind of wish I had gotten it instead of It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover, and that is Tastemakers, and it is a nonfiction book about how food culture in America was shaped, and I really wish that I had picked that one up. And I might get it in 2022. I'm not going to force myself to only get books that were published in that year. Obviously, I got Circe, which was from, I think, 2017 or 2018. It's been out for a while, and that did win Book of the Year. Of the books that got nominated for Best Book of the Year by Book of the Month, I hadn't gotten any of them from Book of the Month. I had read The Lost Apothecary, that I just got randomly at a bookstore, and liked it, but it wasn't the best book I read all year. I have really enjoyed being part of the Book of the Month, and it's definitely done what it was supposed to do for me, which was get me reading genres outside of fantasy and romance. As you can see, I did get 2 romances this year, and I think 2 fantasies, and they weren't my favorite. So Book of the Month definitely swings on the rom-com side, which are not my favorite romances, and I think that'll be good for me, that I'm not going to get romance from Book of the Month. I'm going to focus more on historical fiction, contemporary fiction, magical realism, mystery, what else? I don't remember. Maybe some more nonfiction next year, so we'll see. I'm also already excited to see what my January picks are going to be. Can't wait. I am going to throw my code down there if I can figure it out, so if you want to sign up, please do. But obviously this is not sponsored. If you're a Book of the Month member, what was your best read this year? I would love to see what other people got, because obviously there's 5 books a month, and I'm not going to get all 5 books every single month. I am going to try to pick 1 to 2. It's always hard when they have great add-ons and they have a great backlist that I'm still really wanting to get a bunch of. But I need to wrap this video up because I can hear my kids coming upstairs. I need to feed them cookies so they'll leave me alone. So have a wonderful day. I hope you are in the middle of a good book, about to start a good book, or about to start writing a great book. See ya.